Hello everyone, my name is Uzair Hashmi and for my profile details, please visit sqadia.com. Let's begin this chapter. In this chapter, we are going to discuss the introduction to physiology. We will discuss the history of the beginning of this particular field of medicine, and we are going to discuss various other factors. So let's get started. So we'll start off with the history of physiology and how this particularly established field started off with very basic theories. This will be followed by the discussion of the anatomy and the physiology and what are the different levels of cellular organizations, and we'll discuss the chemical and the cellular organizations from the cell to the tissue to the organs or the organ systems to the body. We are going to discuss the organs and the organ systems. This would be followed by the discussion of an organisms, and we will discuss in detail the process of homeostasis and the homeostasis control systems. This After that, we are going to discuss what are the levels of the structural organizations, in which we'll discuss various different levels, from the organelle to the cellular to the tissue to the organs, leading towards the organ systems and the whole human body. We are going to discuss what are the different types of the body fluids and how the extracellular body fluid is different from the intracellular body fluid, and what is the ratio of the extracellular fluid to the interstitial fluid. We are going to discuss the homeostatic balance, and lastly, we will end up this particular lecture by discussing what are the different branches of physiology, so that if you have a particular interest in a particular field, you must be able to distinguish one from the other subclass of the physiology. So let's start with the history. Of course, it starts off with the Hippocrates, where the Hippocrates is known as the father of medicine. He started the human physiology, and he discovered the theory of the humerus. In this theory of humerus, he discussed four basic substances with their corresponding humor, and that humor is not humor of love, it's the humor which basically represents the quality. Now, when each quality gained excessive, it disturbed the body. For example, earth was associated with the black bile, the water with phlegm, air with blood, and fire with yellow bile. Now, each of these had its associated functions. This theory was, progressed by the Aristotle, which marked the beginning of the physiology in the ancient Greece. Now, he contributed towards the development of the humoral theory of the disease, which also consisted of four primarily qualities of life: cold, wet, and dry. Now, this was followed by the Claudius Galenus, where he first used experiments to probe the functions of the body, and he is known hence as the father of experimental physiology, because he started off experimenting. Now, he also established the fact that the humoral imbalances, or those imbalances that were established by the Aristotle and Hippocrates, these humoral imbalances can be located in specific organs, and including the entire bodies. And he added the notion of temperaments to those basic humoral body responses. Sanguine, or the happy feeling, corresponded with the blood. Phlegmatic was tied to the phlegm. Yellow bile was connected to choleric, and the black bile was corresponded to the melancholy situation and the temperaments of the body. Now, he also saw the human body consisting of the three connected systems, which basically laid down the foundation of the modern physiology. He discovered the three major components and divided them as the first being the brain and the nerves. These were, of course, responsible for the communication of the thoughts and the sensations throughout the body. This was followed by the heart and the arteries. Heart and the arteries which give life, in addition to the brain and the veins, which basically are responsible for the inter-body communications of what are the different types of environments that are being changes, and how in within the body different organs communicate in response to the changing in the extracellular environment. This was followed by the heart and the arteries, which basically he proposed that they give life. This was followed by the liver and the veins, which of course contributed towards the nutrition, and it also contributed towards the growth of the human body. Now, this was followed on by the later scientist, and the Jean Fernel, which is known as the French physician, firstly coined the term known as the physiology. This was followed by the contribution of the Joseph Lister. Now, in 1858, he studied the cause of blood coagulation and the inflammation. Now, this played a very important, role in the advancement towards the understanding of the process of both how the blood is being coagulated, how a blood form is formed, and the process known as the inflammation. Why under certain circumstances inflammation occurs, why under circumstances inflammation is not occurring. And he discovered and implemented all of those ideas which he discovered towards the establishment of the antiseptics in the operation room or in the OT. This played a very important function in establishment of decreased rate of death by a substantial amount. Because before there were no certain criteria that has been defined. Take an example of the anesthetics general and the local anesthetics. There was no concept of that, so there were lots of death because there was no concept of antiseptics, or there was no such concept at that particular time. So this was the huge contribution of the Joseph Lister when he discovered the process of the blood coagulation, inflammation, and how he implemented all of these processes towards the establishment of antiseptics, and in providing a sort of controlled environment which is sort of infection free in the operation theater. Ivan Pavlov then, studied conditional reflexes that involved dog saliva production in response to a plethora of sound and visual stimuli. This is also known as conditioning. Type 3 conditioning. We are going to discuss in some coming lectures what are the different types of reflexes. So basically what he did was, whenever he used to give food to the dog, he used to play a particular sound, let's say a sound of bell. So this particular food was being conditioned with that particular sound. So slowly and steadily he practiced that particular response for a very long time, until he discovered that upon a ringing of that particular sound or bell, the dog used to produce the saliva production. This is followed by the contribution of Skeleton and Schwann, which basically presented the cell theory, which included that the cell is the structural and functional unit of the whole body. August Crowe basically won the Nobel Prize for discovering how the blood is going to be flown in the capillaries that are coming from the arteries into the veins. Henry Hogsley and Hugh Hogsley played a very important function, in establishment of the sliding filament model of the muscle contraction. And he discussed and discovered how the actin and the troponin molecules, including the myosin molecules, play their important role, and how the ATP heads are being formed, and how some certain kinds of the molecules they cause the contraction, and how ATP is being required to retract the muscle from contraction towards the relaxation. Now, coming towards the anatomy and the physiological definitions, of course, that there are two major, the science in terms of the medicines has been divided into two major functions, two major branches, the anatomy and the physiology. The anatomy, of course, as the name indicates, is discussion of and the science of the body structures and their relationships with each other. Now, this anatomy was first studied by, slicing and dissection part, and how let's say the different structural parts of the body. Let's say how muscles are being collaborated, how muscle functions in collaboration with the bones, and what are the importance of the bone in the contractions of the muscles, and how muscles used are being utilized by the process of contraction and relaxation to move the skeleton of the human. And now the anatomy, of course, was studied by the imaging technique, of course. Talking about the other major branch, which is the physiology, which basically dealt with the structural and the functional relationships. Its major focus was to study the functions of the different parts of the body. Its structure was, if there is a presence of a cytoskeleton, what are the functions of the cytoskeletons, what are the different types of the cytoskeletons, and how, let's say, if the ribosomes are working in harmony with the endoplasmic reticulums, and why are the Golgi apparatus is present, if the secretory vesicles are being formed from the endoplasmic reticulum as well, why there is a need to produce the lysosomes, why there is a need for the establishment of even immune systems, right, when there is a presence of the lysosomes in each and every cells of the body. So this particular branch of the science that dealt with the functions of the living organisms, the parts of the living organisms that functions, and what are the chemical and the physical processes behind their which basically means that they have to, in this particular branch of the medicine, deals with the functions and the mechanisms that are involved behind the normal functions of the body. So, to summarize, this particular branch, D, is the science of the body functions, and anatomy is known as the science of the body structures. Moving on, there are the different levels of the cells. Let's start off with the atom. There are, of course, the subatomic particle as well, but for this particular moment, we will keep our focus as the very basic structure, that is the atom. Now the atom, they combine to form a molecule. For example, a molecule of hydrogen will form with together or with the other molecules to form a hydrogen gas. It can also form with oxygen and hydrogen to form a water, which basically accounts for 60 to 75% of the human body. And the molecules, let's say there are different types of the molecules. For example, molecules and the compounds, including the glucose, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, they combine to form the organelles. For example, take an example of the cytoskeleton, the microfilaments, which are composed of the protein only. Take an example of the nucleus or the nucleosomes, which contains a cell membrane, nuclear membrane, and the nuclear pore, which is basically made up of the lipid structure. The organelles then united to form the cells. The cells then united to form the tissues, and the tissues, they combine together to form a particular organ. Take an example of the liver. Now these organs, what they did was they work in harmony to produce the organ systems, and these organ systems hence made a body. Now talking about the chemical and the cellular organizations, at the chemical levels, of course, we have atoms, molecules, and the macromolecules. There are several different other molecules, including the nucleic acids, proteins, carbs, and the lipids. And how these atoms and at the chemical levels, and these molecules and compounds at the chemical level interact with each other by the process of the chemical reactions, either exothermic, either endothermic, either the enzymatic reactions, to carry out the normal physiological functions of the body. Now this was the chemical level. Coming towards the cellular level. Now cellular level, of course, is the level at a particular cell, and the cell has the functional and the structural role, and it has the basic and the specialized functions. Now structural role, of course, provides the shape, of course, along with the functions of the cell, which is to carry out the normal physiology and keep the homeostasis. Talking about the basic specialized functions, each cell has been given a specialized role. For example, the immune cells, they are the white blood cells in particularly, they act as a defense mechanism or the army of the body to combat with the external environmental pathogens, let's say for example bacteria and viruses and other worms. And then there are the stem cells. Now stem cells are the cells that are present in the bone marrow, and they play a very critical role in causing the differentiation of the cells. But take an example of the hematopoietic stem cells. Hematopoietic stem cells, as the name indicates, they subdivides and differentiates to form their RBCs. Now, the renin plays very important functions in the establishment of that, but that is beyond the scope of the level. Now, stem cells, these are the kinds of the stem cells. These are the kinds of the cells which have the capability to differentiate into different types of cells to perform different physiological functions. It is the stem cells, same stem cells, which can be divided to form the immune cells, macrophages, plasma cells, antibodies, and these are the same cells, stem cells, which can form the hepatocytes or the liver cells. They can form the kidney cells. They have the capability to even form the neurons. They have the capability to form the blood cells, including the red blood cells. So, talking from the cellular level, from the chemical and the cellular level, let's move towards the tissue level. Now, the tissue level, at the tissue levels, the cells are of similar shape and they have a specialized function. Like there is a specialized function in a particular organization, there are different departments. Each department has a particular function. Similarly, at the tissue levels, the cells are of the similar shape and they perform a specialized function. Now, there are different types of tissues. That includes the muscle, includes the nervous tissues, the connective tissues, and the epithelial tissues. Of course, the muscle, as the name indicates, is specialized for the contraction and the relaxation by the generation of different tensions. The nervous system, it is being specialized to study, to communicate the signals within the body, so that particular action can be taken place at a particular time to avoid any abnormal situations from arising. There is a connective tissue, it basically acts as a supporting function, a connecting purpose. For example, the ligaments which connects the bone with the muscles. And then there is an epithelial tissue, which basically primarily function is epithelium to prevent the entrance of the unwanted particles, because the epithelium is usually made up of, there are different types of epithelium we are going to discuss in details. So to summarize, the epithelium is specialized for the surface lining and the exchange of materials. Coming towards from the cellular level to the tissue level, and from the tissue level to the organ and the organ systems level. Now the organ levels is composed of two or more tissues to perform a particularly common functions. When we move from the organ level to the organ system level, we have composed of two or even more than two organs that perform in a harmony, which plays a key role that is very essential for its survival. Now it includes, take an example of the digestive, respiratory, and the cardiovascular systems. The human body, by the way, it is composed of 11 organ systems, and we are going to discuss in the coming slide. So after the organs and the organ system, there is a level of the organisms, where all of the body systems, they work collectively to maintain one thing, that is life. And they strive, all of these systems combined, they strive to maintain the internal balance to constant or nearly constant level, and that process, of course, is known as the homeostasis. So to summarize the organization of the human body, we have at chemical level the atoms, which forms atoms, molecules, and compound. They make to form the molecule, which of course is the DNA. The DNA of the cell will form, of course, the cell ultimately, because it carries all the necessary information required to produce a particular cell. And then there's a level of the tissue where the smooth muscle tissue can be formed, and there is a particular organ level where these smooth tissues are present in the stomach, let's say. And then the organ systems combine to form a system levels where there is a digestive system, which contains the esophagus, the liver, stomach, pancreas, gallbladders, small and the large intestine, and these system levels make to form the organism. So up till now, we have discussed the history of the physiology. We discussed the anatomy and the physiology. We discussed what are the different levels of organizations of the body, starting off with the chemical and the cellular level. This cellular level moving towards the tissue level of the organisms, organs, and the organ systems, and ultimately making up the organisms. Now we will discuss the homeostatic control systems, and moving on to homeostasis, balance, and finally the branches of physiology. Now, homeostasis, as the name indicates, is the maintenance of the stable internal environment with response to the fluctuations that we have in the external environment. For example, there is a temperature regulation of 37 degrees, which of course is 98.6 degree Fahrenheit, with a pH control of 7.3 to 7.4. Other factors are also, of course, regulated. That includes the temperature, the hormonal regulation, the regulations of proteins, the regulations of particular kind of enzymes under the certain circumstances. This also includes the internal environment. Of course, it's important to consider the internal environment is made up of the cellular fluid or the extracellular fluid or the ECF. Now, it's important to consider that the cell over here, they are isolated from the external environment. They can still exchange materials with the extracellular fluid because the cells contain the interstitial fluid and there is an extracellular fluid outside. So this is important to consider that. Let's take an example. For the normal physiological functions of the heart, the pacemaker, which is basically the sinoatrial node, the SA node. How does this particular thing works? So the basic structure is the movement of the sodium ions inside. Now this increases the potential from negative to positive, opening of the gate. This is followed by the movement of sodium and calcium ions, and then ultimately the potassium ions move from inside to the outside. And this sends the signal from the atrium to the ventricles for the ventricles to contract. And that is how the rest of the thing goes as well. And that is how the extracellular fluid contains some specific ions. Similarly, the intracellular fluid contains some ions, and that is how these two are being transported with the help of pumps. For example, sodium pumps, sodium potassium pumps, sodium calcium pumps as well. The homeostatic control systems, of course, it's a network of the body components, and they operate in a particular way, under specific circumstances to keep the internal conditions relatively constant. Now there are specific local controls because these local controls are inherent. They are built from inside, and they are specific and particular for a particular organ. And then there are other types of controls, the systemic or the extrinsic controls. And these are the kinds of the controls that are outside the organs instead of being inside. Now, it includes majorly the endocrine regulation and the neural regulation from the nervous system and from the hormonal systems. And both of these systems coordinate, in a very synchronous manner. Now let's discuss the type of loops. Now there is a negative feedback loop. Homeostasis is maintained by either majorly by the negative feedback loop, because when there is some detection in the deviation from a set point, there is a particular change in the body for that particular moment until that particular change is being overcome, and hence to restore the set point. Now there are four components of the negative feedback loop. Now, control variable, of course, This is followed by the sensor, which is going to detect the change that is being occurred. The control center, which is basically controlling every single thing, controlling the sensor sending signal to the control systems. And there is a control variable. Take an example of the temperature or the presence of the infection. Infection presence, I'll take an example of bacteria has been increased. It will send signal to the immune cells to produce much more immune cells. The antibodies that recognize will keep on producing at this process is known as more clonal expansion as well. And this will of course cater the bacteria, targeting bacteria, making sure that infection is not spread. And when the control center or the effector detects that the bacteria has been eliminated, the production of the antibodies or from the plasma cells, they are being suppressed again. So that is how the negative feedback loops system works. The other regulatory mechanisms includes the positive feedback loops, which basically cause the continuous increase in the change. That of course includes the control variable, and that moves in one direction. This also includes the uterine contractions. Moving onwards with the feed forward mechanisms. Now these anticipate the change and they respond to the change before that particular change happens. And this one of the example at the let's take an example from the genetic level. The transcription factors. The transcription factor will bind. This will be followed by the binding of lots of other factors, and this particular process will keep on going. The other example is the exercise, because the heart rate keeps on increasing, as because the body is anticipating that there would be much more need for the oxygen, so they anticipate and they react in advance to counter for the deprivation of the oxygen that is going to be produced in the coming moments. So that particular thing where the heartbeat is being increased so that the oxygen is being pumped from the lungs to all the organs, this process comes under the forward feedback mechanisms. Now talking about the levels of the system structural organization, there is a level known as the system level. A system is consistent on the organs with a common function, of course, and the organ system level. Now the organ system levels, take an example of the digestive systems. Now the function of the digestive system, of course, is to break down the food into chunks and absorb food. It also includes the organs such as mouth, small intestine, large intestine, stomach, pancreas, gallbladder, liver, which is responsible, of course, for the release of much more secretory enzyme and the digestive enzyme for the digestion of either carbs or proteins or the lipids. Now there are 11 systems of the human body, and we are going to discuss over here. Number one is the circulatory system of the blood. And that circulatory system, of course, it consists of the heart, blood, and the blood vessels. This primarily is responsible for the transport of oxygen and the nutrients throughout the body. This is followed by the digestive system. Now the digestive system is responsible basically for the provision of the nutrients. It's provide the route of entry for the nutrients to enter from the extracellular environment into the body, into the intracellular environment. Now it all, because it's the digestive system, it also contains some kind of these enzymes, primarily digestive enzymes, including the HCl as well, that functions basically to chop down either the proteins, carbs, or lipids into very small quantities, into very small components, so that they can be taken up from the small intestine and absorbed into the lymph, and from lymph into the blood, and from blood into the body. Now this also includes the respiratory system. Now the respiratory system starts off from the nose, moving towards the pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveolar sacs, and this of course makes up the whole of the lungs. Moving on towards the urinary systems. Now the urinary systems is responsible for the production of urine, and with the urine, extraneous urine basically act as the clearing of the blood, which is consistent of either the urea or some other harmful drugs or the molecules. So it consists of kidneys, Okay, we are going to discuss in detail the urinary systems in detail, in which we are going to discuss what is the structural and the functional unit of the kidney, which is nephron. We are going to discuss the urinary bladder, followed by the urethra. This is followed by the skeletal systems. Now, skeletal systems primarily objective is to provide shape and structure to the body. It includes the bones, cartilages, and joints. Now, this is followed by the muscular system, of course, which is consistent upon the muscles in the body. Moving onwards, there are integumentary systems, which is consistent on skin, hairs, and nails. The most important, the defense mechanism, the defense system of the body, the immune systems, that includes the lymph nodes that are present at the various different positions of the body. It includes the thymus over here. It includes the bone marrow over here as well. It includes the tonsil over here. The spleen is present over here, as you can see. Appendix, this is followed by appendix, and of course there are many different types of the blood cells that are associated with the immune systems. The lymphatic tissues, which plays a critical role, in clearing of the infections or the bacteria or viruses from the body. This is followed by the nervous system, which includes the brain, the spinal cord as shown here, the nerves. Of course, it has been divided into two major portions, sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. Followed by the nervous system, there is another system known as the endocrine systems. In this particular systems, all the hormones that are being secreted are included, including the hormones secreted from the hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid from the kidneys that are present at the adrenal cortex. That also includes the from the penis, the thymus, of course, that is not shown over here. Of course, that also includes the reproductive system, which is responsible for survival of the species. Moving on towards the homeostasis. Of course, as discussed in the previous slide and in the previous lecture as well, a condition of equilibrium. The basic definition is the condition of equilibrium. The body needs to attain this particular equilibrium conditions where the body's internal environment is in harmony, is a constant or at the nearly constant level as being designed. So there is a dynamic condition. The narrow range is compatible with the maintaining life. For example, if there is a particular change in the temperature, let's take an example of change in the temperature. Now, if there is a slight change which can be coped up with the change in the stimulus or that is coming from the external environment, the homeostasis will be occurring to minimize the change that basically is occurring in the external environment. For example, the heat is conserved in the winter by the constriction or the narrowing down of the vessels or the capillaries and the arteries, and that is why whenever you open tap in winter and put your hand under it, the hand would not show any signs of blood, because the blood vessels are being constricted. It means their diameter has been small, so it is, this vessel constriction is being done to avoid the loss of the heat from the body. Now let's take an example over here as well, that the blood glucose level, of course, they ranges from 70 to 110 mg of glucose per liter of the blood. The body needs to maintain that particular concentration. The whole body, of course, plays a very vital role in the maintenance of internal environment within the normal limits, like discussed. And now talking about the homeostasis and the body fluids. Now, the body fluids plays a very important role in maintaining the normal functions of the different organs and maintaining the homeostasis as well. Now, the body fluids are defined as they are very dilute, they are watery solutions, and they contain, of course, the chemicals inside or outside of the cells. This is followed by the intracellular fluid and the extracellular fluid. The intracellular fluid, as the name indicates, is present within the cells. whereas the extracellular fluid is present outside the cells, and it also contains the interstitial fluid that is present between the cells. Now, talking about the ratio of ECF to the interstitial fluid, the female contains 45% of the solid and 55% of the fluids, as compared to males, which contains 60% of the fluids in the body as compared to 40%. Now, the total body fluid is being divided into the intracellular fluid, which basically covers two-thirds of the total fluid, and one-third is being covered by the extracellular fluid. Now, in this one-third, this 80% of this one-third is covered by the interstitial fluid, the fluid that is present between the cells and the tissues, and 20% is the plasma, which is basically the blood that flows throughout the circulatory systems of the body. Homeostatic balance is continuously being disrupted, and there is a physical insult that is being offered to the body, and that includes either there is the presence of intense heat, as a sudden change in temperature, or there is a lack of oxygen. It also includes the changes in the internal environment as compared to the external environment. For example, there is a sudden drop of the blood glucose whenever you let's say you during the moments of fasting, or due to the lack of food. There is a physiological stress, of course, as well. For example, there is a high demand for students to work at school, and there of course are disruptions, either mild or temporarily. Of course, these mild disruptions, they are quickly restored by the very efficient homeostatic functions of the body. And of course, there are intense and the prolonged. For example, there is a severe poisoning, or there is, let's say, the example of the cirrhosis of the liver, which of course is intense, and of course it's very prolonged. Now, coming towards the very last section of the body of this particular lecture. In this particular slide, we are going to discuss about the branches of physiology, and how these branches work in harmony, or in a very synchronous manner, to establish our understanding towards the physiology. Now, talking about the human physiology, of course, focuses on the study and of the functions of the human body overall. Talking about the spatial physiology, when we dive deep into the spatial physiology, we are basically dealing with the specific organs. For example, physiology of heart, physiology of kidney, physiology of pancreas, physiology of liver, and how, let's say, liver is being divided into different hepatic sections, each containing the hepatocytes. Take an example of what is the relationship of bile duct, where how the portal venous system is present in the liver, and how it plays a very important role in prevention of the development of fluid in the peritoneal cavity. Then moving towards the systems physiology, it covers each and every aspects of the functions of the specific organ system. For example, take an example of the nervous system, how that particular nervous system works. Along with the lymphatic system, there is an example of digestive system that we discussed in the previous slide. Now, there is another branch that includes the pathophysiology. Of course, is derived from a Greek word meaning pathos, meaning disease, and physiology. So basically, this branch discusses what are the physiological changes that occur in the body when there is an interaction with the pathogen, or when in the presence of certain diseases, either the viral diseases or the bacterial diseases or other kind of diseases, even the autoimmune diseases. Now, there is another branch known as neurophysiology. As the name indicates, it discusses the functional properties of the nervous system as a whole. Now, if we talk about the endocrinology, it of course functions to deal with the hormonal systems and how they control the body functions. For example, let's say glucocorticoids, the adrenal cortex, the hormones secreted from the adrenal cortex, epinephrine, norepinephrine, how they play a very important role in the flight or fight responses. Now, there is another branch known as immunology, where basically it is dependent on the functions, discussion of the defensive mechanisms of the body under the usual circumstances. And this branch has been divided into two major portions, talking about that, in which we talk about innate immunity or the adaptive immunity, the natural or humoral body responses, and how these particular in under the immunology, how there is a presence of the complement system, what is the role of the humoral or the adaptive immunity, what are the different types, even if it also discusses what are the different types of autoimmune diseases or the hypersensitivity reactions, what happens during those moments. Now, in this particular lecture, we discussed starting off from the history of physiology, moving towards the anatomy and the physiology, and we discussed the levels of organization, starting off with the atoms, moving towards the molecular, chemical levels of organization, from chemical to the cellular, from cellular to tissue, from tissue to organs to organ systems, and ultimately the organisms. We discussed the homeostatic functions, and under that we discussed how different control systems are important in development of the collaboration to work to maintain the life. We also discussed the levels of organization. Of course, we discussed the ratio of the extracellular fluid to the intracellular fluid, and how the materials are being exchanged from the intracellular fluid to the extracellular fluid during the normal physiological functions of the body. And lastly, we discussed what are the different branches of physiology. So that is all for this particular lecture, and for more lectures, keep watching sqadia.com. Thank you.